Welcome to Nighttime Logic. Nighttime Logic are the parts of the story that are felt, but not consciously processed. It is also the name of our program, where we hear from and talk with dark fiction authors, fantasists, and authors of the uncanny. Today is Tuesday, August 11th, the year of 2026. It is the summer here in New York. It is hot and humid. My name is Daniel Braum. I am your host. I am also the author of books. One of those books is called Creatures of Liminal Space. We were sort of practicing holding up our books, or we meant to practice holding up our books before we started. And there we go. I've held up mine. I'm here with author Rudi Dornemann, and I will introduce Rudi to you. But welcome back to the program. People who watch the program are no strangers to Rudi. Rudi Dornemann, who grew up in Milwaukee and now lives in Portland, Maine. His fiction has appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Conduit, Strange Horizons, and the Mummy anthology, Spirits and Wrath. His most widely published work was a poem on the side of an animal crackers box, and his most obscure was a set of 6 Italo Calvino-inspired short stories that were included in a gallery exhibition at Northern Ohio University. He instigated and contributed to the flash fiction website The Daily Cabal and wrote reviews and interviews for the Rain Taxi Review of Books for a number of years. His latest project is a fiction podcast email series, Notes from an Imaginary Place, which can be found and subscribed to via his website, which is www.rudidornemann.com. We're going to be talking more about that this entire episode. Welcome, Rudi. How are you? It's great to have you back. Great to see you.
Thanks. I'm good and really glad to be back. So thank you.
This is really. Thank you so much for coming. For those of you who haven't heard, we're just about to really dive into Notes from an Imaginary Place. In fact, Rudi, after he catches us up and introduces us to the series, he's going to read not one, but 2 debut stories here on the program. So, Rudi, tell us, bring us up to speed. Tell us about Notes from Imaginary Place. What is the series? How can we connect with it? And where are you with the series right now?
Well, I am kind of hoping that tonight is giving me the boost to sort of revive it. It's about halfway done. The idea was to do 26 stories, each set in a different fantastic place. And I think I've gotten 13 of them out. So, so what we'll hear tonight will be number 14 and number 15.
Oh, okay. So we've got 13. So we're crossing a threshold.
14 out. So this will be 15 and 16. Yeah.
So we've most certainly crossed the threshold. We're concretely past the halfway point. But it is such a delightful, intriguing series, and I was so excited to hear that we were going to do this tonight. And tell us it's a email and podcast series. Tell us about that.
Right. Yeah. Kind of couldn't make up my mind. Kind of thought both were a nice idea. So when I'm sending it out as an email newsletter, so you get to read the story. And I'm also recording it as a podcast. Not doing anything terribly fancy. It's just me reading it, basically. But you get your choice that way if you want to see it or hear it. It's been a good practice not only to write them, but then to have to kind of record them. It's they always say to read your work aloud, but reading your work aloud and then editing out the ums, it makes you look at it even harder. So
yeah, right. That's the part they don't teach. Like stop using crutches. Now I'm going to be I think that's definitely I think my crutch or X-Men superpower is to mispronounce things. So I think that's or not even catch them. So I'm not sure I think I'm using my ums and verbal crutches all over the place. But without further ado, please let's go right to the first story of the evening. I'll turn the screen over to you, and
Okay.
I'll let you introduce a story, and I'll be joining you when it's over.
All right. So,
Oh, that's me.
oh, I'm adjusting my screen here, so I got my story to read. If you have the right story to read, okay, there we go. Yeah. So, yeah, there's 26 stories because there's 26 letters in the alphabet, and each story is set in a location, but goes with a different letter. They're all out of order, which is why we're starting off with Yard, which is my story for the letter Y. Yeah. I mean, another thing about the series, and I'll talk about this maybe a little bit more if we get into it, but each one has a main character from a different profession. So you'll see what the profession is tonight and how that kind of factors into things. So here we go with Yard. The kinesiologist had come to study the croquet players, the arc of their swings, the set of their shoulders, the steadiness of their stances. She'd come to show them how to improve all of those things. She told them this the day they met them. Together, she said, we can optimize your game. They all shrugged, making a variety of non-ergonomic movements with their collarbones. Optimize, said one of them. Sure. Couldn't hurt, said another with a halting, inaccurate swing of their mallet. The kinesiologist unpacked her notebooks, unfolded her sun umbrella, perched on her lightweight folding stool, and began to observe. She made recommendations every few days, augmented with charts and diagrams and the occasional demonstration, repeating moves in slow motion over and over until she could feel the croquet players growing restless around her. They shrugged some more, nodded intermittently, tried gamely to repeat the motions and practice the exercises. They adopted her every suggestion, placing their feet just so, visualizing a teacup balanced on either shoulder, moving their arms as if the mallet were weightless up until the moment it made contact with the ball, and then moving as if it were as heavy as a sledgehammer. At least they would do all these things for a single game. Then they went back to playing in their usual careless, casual manner, feet askew, shoulders seesawed, swings too slow or too fast and never quite on target. And the kinesiologist never saw them return to her exercises again, any of them, even though by the end of the week she must have offered up at least 24. On top of this, the players wouldn't tell her their names. Throughout her copious notes, the kinesiologist had to refer to them by the colors of their mallets. Aside from the frustration of her work not being taken seriously, the time passed pleasantly enough. She followed the players up and down vast expanses of lawn, which wound along for 2 miles or more, sliding from sun to shadow and back again, here between a forest and a brick wall, there between a brook and a paved path, or between a bed of tulips and a trench, between the windowless back wall of a stone barn and a rustic fence of bark-covered boards, between a greenhouse and the shore of a pond, between a hedge and another hedge. She'd studied the croquet players for several weeks before one of them mentioned that their playfield was, in fact, the yard of an immense house. By then, her time with them was nearly over. It was the morning she'd intended to give them her final summation. She'd spent that day's first couple of games watching them intently, staring hard through her tracking glasses, the ones with grids of fine wires embedded in the lenses. She was going over her findings in her head, reviewing her diagnoses, distilling all her previous advice down to its most concentrated, most effective form. Just a few words to each player, but the right words, the words that would make each of them elevate their game, to perfect the way they use their bodies so they'd make croquet a kind of miniature utopia. She knew it was irrational, but she half felt that if they finally followed her advice, they would lift her up with them into a space of perfection that would last from the thwack of the first ball to the final ding of the timing bell. But then Purple Mallet offhandedly mentioned that the serpentine lawn that was the croquet players' playfield was in fact only the backyard for a very sprawling house, an immense building that stood just beyond that forest, just the other side of the stone barn, just beyond the hedge and the other hedge. Sudden vertigo nearly toppled the kinesiologist off her folding stool. The center of her world for the past month was nothing but a secondary, off the margin, literally peripheral part of someplace larger. She importuned the players from wicket to wicket through the next match, asking questions about the house. How big was it? How many people lived there? Who had built it? When? Why? How often did they go there? What was it made of? Did it have a name? What did they think of it? It turned out they didn't think much of it at all. And none of them had ever been inside, although they assured her that yes, it was inhabited, and they'd heard a rather crowded in places. The house stretched amoeba-like in 5 directions and was half a mile wide at its widest point. It was old, although they didn't know how old, or who'd built it, or why it was so huge. None of the croquet players had any interest in going there, let alone living there, even though there were always rooms to let. The sun was setting, and the players were packing up their wickets and stakes before she could wheedle one last answer out of them, the reason why they never visited the house. They were sure it was haunted, very haunted. When they told her that, she had to go there. Getting to the house was easy now that she knew it was there. She followed the wall where it traced the edge of the yard and kept following it until it turned uphill through a copse of trees and brought her to a patio where several families were grilling their dinner over a fire pit. It smelled delicious, and they invited her to grab a plateful, but she saw a door behind them. "Is that the way into the main house?" she asked. It wasn't. It was only the entrance to a cluster of apartments like pockets in the great house's outer wall. However, if she went a little further, she'd find the way in, just past the rock garden and the moss-covered fountain. In minutes, she'd found a massive wooden door that creaked when she opened it. She stepped into a plush but dusty lobby that seemed to erase every sound right out of the air as she walked through it. She crossed a second lobby that had a wide tiled floor where her every footstep echoed and her every breath rasped loudly in her ears. And then she was into the house itself. She wandered along hallway after hallway, up and down endless flights of stairs, through a vast ballroom hung with crystal chandeliers and maze-like office areas ceilinged with cheap acoustic tiles, along velvet-carpeted mezzanines and through steamy basements crowded with out-of-date heating machinery. Everywhere was full of people, chatting in the hallways, helping each other lug things up the stairs, jitterbugging at one end of the ballroom while another group rehearsed an ancient play with masks at the far end, and a third group practiced some kind of umbrella-based martial art between them. Pausing the evening shift to throng around take-out Chinese food in a meeting room in one of the office areas, playing chess in the mezzanine's velvet quiet, or staring out from its railings across the chasm of the atrium, playing a high-stakes game using cards with pictures of crystals on them and betting with leaves they plucked from miniature roses that stood between their chairs while completely ignoring the kinesiologist in a way that made it clear they wanted her to move through and leave them alone as quickly as possible. As she went, she asked people if they'd ever seen or heard ghosts. The kinesiologist was fascinated by ghosts. It seemed to her like they must be a kind of boneless, limbless, ectoplasmic sprite who moved however they wanted with none of the constraints that having a physical form made inevitable. beings she could be around without continually thinking of better, more efficacious, healthier ways to do whatever they might be doing at that moment. Beings she could simply be with, free from any urge to criticize, instruct, or improve. The people chatting in the hallways leaned and lounged on walls and doorways with regrettable posture. The folks hauling things up the stairs used their backs too much and their knees too little. The ballroom jitterbugging mob needed to loosen from the shoulders on down and just let the movement shake through their bodies. The masked play rehearsers should be less tense when holding the various postures into which they needed to freeze, and they should be taking better advantage of the director's frequent diatribes to stretch. The martial artists all gripped their umbrellas too tightly, perhaps as a result of the handles not being properly balanced. The office takeout diners all held their chopsticks a little too high up or too low down for best control. The chess players should be keeping their feet flat on the floor. The cross-chasm starers should be taking the occasional deeper breath. And the card players would wake the next morning with various pains in their wrists and fingers. But the kinesiologist didn't mention any of this to any of them. Growing up, she'd wanted to be a ghost, to float up free of gravity, to move through the world, touching nothing, moving nothing, changing nothing, not even leaving footprints as she hovered over the ground. She wondered now if she'd jinxed herself, if that early wish had rebounded on her as a curse, given how thoroughly uninfluenced her clients were by all her research, all her advice, all her insights. So, as she walked through the labyrinthine, sprawling house, she withheld her expertise and instead asked the people she encountered if they'd ever seen or heard ghosts. She hung around one of the hallway chatting groups until they included her in their conversation. Then she hung around a while longer until she could ask her questions. They laughed and went back to talking about problems getting their packages in the mailroom and annoying sounds the radiators made, and said not one word about ghosts. She helped a group who were wrestling a couch up the stairs, while they were resting on one of the landings between floors, but not on the couch. And when most of the group had regained their breath, she asked if any of them had ever sensed anything supernatural. They looked at each other, ummed a bit, then launched into a 20-minute collectively narrated story that seemed to be more twists and turns than plot, but in the end only turned out to be about being surprised by a draft where they hadn't expected one, and didn't have anything at all to do with ghosts. She joined the jitterbugging until her knees ached, then took advantage of a break to ask one of the people doing a leg stretch beside her what they thought of the possibility that there might be paranormal echoes left behind by lives long over. They just shrugged with a shrug that was a lot like the shimmies of their dancing, then shimmied off into dancing again. But the kinesiologist couldn't keep up and gave up on getting an answer to her question. She ducked and parried her way through the sparring umbrellas. They answered between their lunges. They'd never seen the slightest wisp of an unnatural presence, and had never felt their umbrellas pass through anything thicker than ordinary air. She put on an unused mask and joined the mime chorus at the back of the rehearsal of what she found out was a 3,000-year-old tragedy. She rehearsed through an act and a half before they took a break. The actors with speaking parts wouldn't talk to her at all, and her compatriots in the chorus only answered in mime. She watched for a full 5 minutes as they gestured, waved, and pointed. In the end, she wasn't sure if they were acting out encounters with ghosts, if they were demonstrating that there was no reality aside from the physical, or if they were just telling her that their costumes itched. Up on the mezzanine, she asked a pair of chess players, and they answered in unison. There is no logic of reality that would contain ghosts. It is not worth considering. She whispered her questions to one of the people who stared across the atrium. If ghosts existed, then they would go on forever, and they'd keep multiplying, they said. But then there would be infinite ghosts everywhere, and if that were true, how could we not ever manage somehow to see them or hear them or sense them? But we don't. No matter how hard I stare into the dark, no matter how hard I listen to the silence, no matter how much I try to open my senses, nothing. They gripped the wooden rail so tightly that the kinesiologist heard it creak. Therefore, they said, there are no ghosts, neither here nor anywhere. They lifted their head, and it seemed to the kinesiologist that they stared even more intently into the darkness. The basement card players didn't say anything, and they projected such an air of intent and uninterruptibility that the kinesiologist didn't even try to ask them anything. However, she saw that the players had left a place with an empty chair, a fan of cards face down on the tabletop beside a small pile of bedding leaves, and a drink into which the ice had almost entirely melted. The server, who kept all the drinks topped up and didn't let the bowls of salty snacks go empty, noticed the kinesiologist noticing the empty place. When they were in the service elevator heading back up to the kitchen, the server shrugged. He said, it's a ritual with them. We have to set it up like that every time they're here to play. It all needs to be just so. Did the players ever explain? The server shook his head. The most I ever got out of them was one time when I'd asked a few too many questions, and they were clearly getting annoyed with me, and one of them kind of snapped and said, well, we're not a bunch of croquet players, are we? We know which side our toast is buttered on. We don't have our heads in the sand. No, sir, not us. We make it perfectly clear who's welcome and who should just pass on by and keep passing on by forever. No mixed signals from us. The server had no idea what any of that meant, and neither did any of his coworkers. The kinesiologist hoped it might have something to do with ghosts, but admitted to herself she had no real way to know what the card players were implying or what kind of signals they felt the croquet players were sending. The kinesiologist paused on her way out of the house, stood alone for a moment in the empty tiled expanse before she entered the sound-swallowing outer lobby. She tried to feel if anything was there, and just when she began to think that there might be something, or the slightest suggestion of the vaguest hint of something, 3 rollerbladers swooped on by her. They were gone in a second, but their form was perfect, no notes. They were gone so fast and as completely as any ghost, leaving her unsettled as she found her way out, retraced her way through the gathering evening, and made her way back to the yard. The croquet players were still there, now with glowing wickets, stakes that flickered like fireflies, and balls that flared bright when you hit them and faded slowly as they rolled. She stood a while, listening for the crack of a struck ball in the darkness, then watching the lights shift across the dark lawn. It was as calming as watching fireflies. When the game continued out of sight beyond a bend in the hedge, she took that as a sign to retire for the night. The following morning, she found ordinary hoops and ordinary wickets back in their conventional arrangement. But the game wasn't anything she'd seen before. Every time one of the players used their mallet, they treated it as if it were an entirely different object. One time, poke the ball with a handle like a pool cue. Another time, grip the handle between elbow and ribs, stand above the ball, and drop the mallet so that it might send the ball off in any direction or might just mash it into the soft earth. Yet another time, twist the mallet head between your palms so that the handle swung back and forth like a pendulum, while you duck-walked forward until the tip of the handle grazed the top of the ball and scooched it a few finger lengths along the grass. Blue mallet held her mallet horizontally overhead and staggered across the field as if it weighed hundreds of pounds. The kinesiologist tried to guess which back muscles were involved, how raising it or lowering a shoulder might help, how the lats might assist, but couldn't make any sense of it. And then came the release when Blue Mallet leapt into the air like a breaching porpoise and followed the mallet toward the ground, striking the edge of the ball with the middle of the handle. The ball made its own leap into the air on an arc that was nearly as high, landed on top of one of the bamboo wickets, and sprang back. Blue Mallet rolled quickly to one side as the ball whizzed by her and struck one of the posts that were planted at various odd angles around the course. The other players clapped courteously and resumed their own elaborate exertions. The kinesiologist realized that the players were honoring every suggestion she'd made over the week she'd been with them. They'd rearranged and repurposed every move, every scrap of advice, making each serve a different purpose, re-optimizing the game into something completely strange and new. They seemed to be discovering it as they went along. And the kinesiologist was struck by the contrast with the card players who, although they clearly held a place open at their table for the unknown, closed off every possibility for spontaneity from their game. If she were a wandering spirit, she knew into which realm of play she'd rather wander. Green Mallet, Yellow Mallet, and Purple Mallet walked towards her with an odd, perhaps joking formality. They held a mallet out to her, silver, a color she'd never seen before. Green Mallet produced a matching ball from behind her back. After a moment, the kinesiologist realized this was an invitation. She accepted and began to play a game that she didn't know how to play, let alone how to play correctly. The lawn felt spongy underfoot. The mallet had a weight to it. She was aware of her fellow players moving in her peripheral vision as they set up their own shots, and even without seeing them clearly, she recognized her influence on the way they moved. She measured out from the stake to the starting spot and set her silver ball down. She straightened up, traces of dew on her fingertips, the sun just above the top of the hedge, so direct and bright that she needed to squint. She held the head of the mallet between her heels and kicked backwards. She turned to see her ball roll away, slowing gradually, then encounter some unseen lump in the ground and veer off just enough that it struck the ball of one of the other players. Even under these enigmatic new rules, she knew that there would be some kind of consequence, and she waited to see what would happen, what she would do. And that's the end.
And that was the debut of excuse me, the debut of Yard from Notes from an Imaginary Place. Excuse me. One of the things that's fascinating about this series is how deceptively simple the concept is. It's just, oh yeah, we have 26 stories, and there are 26 letters in the alphabet, so this is going to be a lettered thing. And Yard is such a simple title and a simple prompt for what is such an intricate and vast imaginary place. I absolutely loved it. And not only do we have an imaginary place with each story, we have a profession. So it was a delight to see. I don't think I've ever seen a main character as a I'm going to say it wrong. I'm saying kinesthesiologist, but I think I'm adding a syllable in there.
Yeah, I had to work really hard to pronounce it right most of the times there. Yeah, and I think I went through 2 drafts with like an extra syllable in it, and had to go look it up.
I think I've gone through two decades of adding that extra syllable. I actually once knew a kinesiologist. But speaking of her, she's such a fascinating character to me because, well, of course, just because of right from the start, the way she views the world, she views the people around us through the lens of her vocation. But the thing that I keep coming back to is she's on a month-long on-site assignment. I'm like, who is this person? but we know very clearly who she is for purposes of the story, she is primarily she is her vocation, and there's so many delightful clues that we get as to who she is. She as a child, we learned she wanted to be a ghost as a child and to float up, which we'll come back to that in a few minutes. She talks about she's able to take this month-long assignment in this place that at the very least is so much more than it seems, that it is almost unnaturally TARDIS-like. So much is happening in the periphery. That is clearly a fantastical imaginary place. And even at one point, she even contemplates, she said, well, if I were a wandering spirit, if I were a wandering spirit coming through, yeah. And then I think when she does converse with these enigmatic groups of people there, I think my favorite line is, there is no logic of reality that contains ghosts. These sort of tautologies that just daring us to not believe what the sort of clues are coming up. How do you want to talk about how do you give yourself more prompts within the large prompt, or how does that work? And also how do you land on the vocations?
Well, the so there are more prompts, and I can get into like how they all interrelate, but basically coming up with the vocations was a matter of like just kind of finding something for every letter in the alphabet.
Are the vocations lettered as well?
Yes, they are lettered as well.
Okay, so that's alphabet. Sneaky. So, so we have Y matching up with K. So, is it suffice to say that does K do they match up in the other one where the imaginary place starting with K have a vocation with Y, or is that an erroneous theory?
No, actually, it's so there are actually 5 prompts going on, and the location and the profession are separate strands. They each have something about them, though, that they are related to, that at least originally was an alphabet running in the opposite direction, although I wound up at one point tweaking it and kind of like adjusting in another complicated way. But
okay, I do have memories of seeing perhaps some sort of arcane spreadsheet map or formula, if I'm allowed to divulge.
Yes, there is in fact a spreadsheet. So each one is set in a place that is metaphorically an animal, in this case, snake.
Wait, that's the extra. See I spoke to. Oh, it's so simple. Hold my Coke Zero while I explain to you just how simple it is, Mr. Braum.
Yep. So it's a snake, so it's winding around the house. The profession is a kinesiologist. Each story has somebody who approaches the profession like a tool or device of some kind, which in this case was an alembic, so an alchemist distilling vessel. And then the kind of last element, which is like another separate alphabet of things, alphabet worth of verbs. And they're really just trying to do X, which in this case was levitate, as it worked out. Which, in fact, I noticed as I was reading, I'd actually kind of worked into when they were at first working with the croquet players before the idea of ghosts had even came along. But then, of course, it comes back. It just synced up perfectly when the ghost thing came in. So,
what came first, croquet or kinesiologist?
Kinesiologist came first, because that was the letter K on the alphabet. So
how wonderful to have her on assignment for the month-long croquet workshop.
Yeah, years ago I saw an article about some folks. I think there's like a whole league or multiple leagues of doing this kind of off-road extreme croquet where they're like they've got like they go like off through the woods and just all terrain croquet. So
Wow.
always wanted to come back and do something weird with croquet.
Yeah.
So.
This definitely, this definitely worked. Let's so much more to talk about, but I'd love to hear the next story first and save those questions where we can talk about them both at the same time. So,
okay,
shall we move on? Can you reveal to us the letter and any other prompts you wish, or no other prompts you wish? The letter, the title, and we'll hear the next story.
Yeah, I'll give you the secret decoder ring for the whole thing here.
Okay,
So,
how fun.
So I was halfway through Yard, and I realized that on my list of places, I was writing the bit about the inside of the house with the hallway and the boiler room and the mezzanine, and I realized, wait a minute, mezzanine is one of the other places I have on the list. So for the first time, I wound up creating two stories in overlapping places that are basically in the same world. So you're about to go back to the giant house. So my prompts for this one are mezzanine, jumping mouse. The profession is zealot, because you've got to do something with Z. And they approach their work like a needle. They're really just trying to nest.
And here we have mezzanine without further ado.
Yeah. All right. So mezzanine. Every time the clock down in the lobby strikes another hour, the only ghost rises up, one story at a time, floor by floor, mezzanine by mezzanine, alone, always alone, the last remaining incorporeal spirit in this vast, sprawling building. At midnight, they reach the roof, look across a sea of treetops toward distant hills and beyond them, toward the glow of even more distant cities. 1 a.m., and they're back in the sub-basement. Then the basement at 2, then hovering in the lobby at 3, then mezzanines, mezzanines, mezzanines the rest of the day. A long time ago, when they were more than just a substanceless, etheric emanation, they pursued obsessions, details of which are lost to them now. Their memory holds nothing but the shell of the feeling of having once had these driving passions. Their earthly lifetime was bound up in single-mindedness, in relentless zeal, in so many so thoroughly considered plans that all serve the same great goal. Now, when the ghost might float free of any bonds, they're bound as strongly to this empty routine of hourly rising as they once were to the cause that defined their long ago life. After all the striving for whatever that purpose had been, what they really want to do is to settle in, hide away in some small cozy place, and while away their afterlife in placid contentment. But their existence is enforced restlessness, an eternal striving not of their choosing, an empty zealotry for ascension. Depending on the time of year, first light catches them on the second, third, or fourth floor, illuminating the dust eddying in the air, turning the velvet of the seats that ring the atrium as bright as blood. At least for the first few minutes, before the light shifts and the velvet goes back to faded pastel pink, blotched with ancient stains, worn bald at the corners and torn. Everything's old, splintered, ragged, older than the ghost, than their life and afterlife added together. The atrium well is the center of the building. The ghost supposes it serves some circulatory purpose, cycling air up and down through the structure, but they have no idea why it would be ringed like this with theater seats, as if there had once been performances, wire walkers, aerialists, perhaps trained birds, or small hot air balloons. The ghost is as empty of who they once were as the atrium is of whatever spectacles it once hosted. All that's left of the ghost's living personality is a small repertoire of hand gestures, a repeated curling flick of the fingers of the left hand when they're particularly absorbed in thought, a tapping together of the thumbs when they're restless, and in moments when they're about to begin something important, a motion like they're starting to clap, but just when their hands almost touch, they move away from each other fast, like repelling magnets. They haven't done this last one in quite a few years. It's been that long since they did anything else but rise through the next floor and then dawdle about, waiting to be yanked up again at the next striking of the hour. It is quiet in the dark hours when the ghost passes through the uppermost and lowermost floors, before many of the building's human inhabitants are stirring, or after they've retired for the day. It wasn't always this way. In the early times, the vast building's nighttime was thronged with spirits who shrieked up and down the hallways, apparitions who waylaid apartment dwellers on the stairways or in their own bedrooms, creeping mists who toyed with the peripheral vision of the late-staying workers in the office areas, vague dreads who hovered at the shoulders of the poker players in the basement, spectral tumblers who twisted eternally in the midair of the atrium. Then the exorcists came, wearing robes even dustier than the mezzanine seats. They brought endless, rhythmless, droning, sing-song chants, chiming, clanging, crashing bells that were never in rhythm, and candles that burned with the tiniest of flames, yet still produced copious volumes of cloying smoke, more penetrating than any apparition. For nearly a year, they roamed the building's halls, its stairways, its ballrooms, its shops and restaurants, its every cranny and nook. They drove the ghosts from their accustomed haunting places, herded them to the atrium well, and drove them up from one floor to the next, finally pushing them out through the penthouse floor's gilded ceiling to a labyrinth of sigils and arcane hieroglyphs chalked on the tar of the roof. The ghosts were trapped by the lines of mystical geometry, struggling like flies on flypaper, until the exorcists gathered one dawn for the great and almost entirely effective dispelling. "It's a mercy we're doing," said the exorcist-in-chief before that last bout of droning chants. "We're helping you to rise up with the sun, to ascend to a better place." The one exception to the exorcist's success was that they left one ghost behind, trapped in endless reenactments of that final floor-by-floor exodus, forever alone. The last ghost can bear the endless clockwork rising. Some part of them still remembers a lifetime of steady incremental striving. But what breaks their spectral heart is that they can't choose their goal. They ache to remember how they wasted their first few post-life decades, back when they could drift and wander for days through the gigantic building, guided by their whims, when they'd lose themselves in its endless tangle of corridors, just so that finding their way back again to one of the mezzanines would feel like the tiniest and most trivial of homecomings. But the mezzanines are a prison now, velvet upholstered perhaps, but a prison nonetheless, and continually returning to them throughout the day, and day after day, brings no satisfaction. When they're up on the rooftop some midnights, and the moonlight is sufficient, and the cloud cover is favorable, they can see their former companions, the host of evicted ghosts. The ghost mob floats many thousands of feet above, spiraling in a faintly glowing disk. The last ghost isn't sure if mortal eyes could distinguish them from the cirrocumulus and other atmosphere mists. When the moon is particularly right, they can feel the tug of their compatriots high above, a kind of sympathetic centrifugal nudge. as if the last ghost would be spinning on the rooftop below while they circulate in their luminous dance above. As if the last ghost should be spinning on the rooftop below while they circulate in their luminous dance above. Before the great expulsion, as near as the remaining ghosts could tell, the other ghosts had all followed their own itineraries through the building, routes and routines they were fated to repeat. The trio of children who kept swapping chairs and kept swapping faces, the arguing couple who appeared on a different floor every day, but always in front of a window, always using the same hand gestures, always rising intensity from conversation to anger to screams until finally dissolving into waterfalls of spectral dust. The crying man they'd seen through the doorway to the fifth floor ballroom, who danced with no partner in his circled arms, who sobbed in time to a waltz no one else could hear. The woman who juggled knives while she crept along the 5-inch ledge between the top floor mezzanine and the abyss of the atrium, who missed the same step every night and fell in a silent rush of soundless silk, her knives lingering behind, circling in their orbits without her. The ghost, who is now the last ghost, had understood the feeling of deja vu panic they'd seen on the juggler's face every time her foot began to slip. But they never understood the grin on the sobbing dancing man's face. After a succession of months, when the moon is never anything but wrong, they see the other ghosts whirling high above them again like a miniature galaxy, and once again they feel the tug of that spiraling. They realize that they can submit to this force, choose to let it take them rather than 1 o'clock's downward drag. They know the spinning will whirl them around and around, and that it will cast them somewhere far from the rooftop. Whether miles away from the building or just yards, they don't know. But their premonition is clear. Letting go will carry them to somewhere outside and away, somewhere different, and into who knows what new routine. They focused on the ghost throng above, try to lose themselves in the sweep of the revolving dance, but nothing happens. They feel the pull, a fast-flowing river that almost takes them away, but it isn't enough to unshackle them from the last faint traces of the exorcist's rune work. They push, they twist, but they still feel 1 o'clock's single chime looming nearer in every tick of the lobby clock so many floors below. A substanceless shudder runs through them at the thought of another day of endless leaping, and they push harder. They're still stuck. When they're sure it won't work, they feel a stab of disappointment, cold and sharp, and it's the sharpness of that disappointment that finally cuts them free, and the spectral current flings them across the countryside. They fly over ditches and outbuildings, past hedges and walls, like some ectoplasmic meteor, and fall to earth in a well-tended patch of lawn, their momentum carrying them a few feet underground, where they blink to find themselves among the earthworms and pillbugs. They drift up to the surface, and nothing holds them back from wandering, so they climb a tree, wade through a pond, walk along the alternating sides of a thick stone wall. Once the sun comes up, they seek the source of one bird's song, then another's. They chase wisps of morning fog until each one has melted into dew. They follow the lawn as it winds along the vast building's equally oversized yard. Ahead, they hear a crack like they used to hear from the billiard room adjacent to the 12th floor mezzanine, but louder and not as sharp. An outdoor sound. Another crack follows, and another, moving away, so they hurry to follow. The lawn is forested with metal arches and wooden stakes, crowded with people who dash back and forth, waving mallets at wooden balls that keep crashing together with that distinctive sound. Croquet enthusiasts, but playing a frenzied, unpredictable, ever-shifting version of the game that the ghost has never seen before. Players hold mallets upside down, wave them behind their backs, at seemingly random intervals, the players blindfold themselves, slide their mallet handles up their sleeves, and throw the balls with an overhand move like cricket bowling. The last ghost feels a pull that wants to lift them up to the level of the treetops, maybe higher, maybe the first stage in a new, unwilling routine of daily rising. They resist. They watch. The game mutates, devolves, returns to some kind of standard format, then begins changing in new ways. The last ghost is enraptured. They begin to get their own ideas, ideas that start to branch and multiply. Their hands come together, nearly touch, and push apart again. They know what purpose they'll pursue. They join the game, weaving their own invisible dance into the ever-changing geometry, ducking and dodging, walking on wickets or skimming over the grass, letting the balls row through them or cartwheeling ahead of them, all the time snug in the comfort of croquet and chaos.
Chaos. Sympathetic centrifugal nudges. So many great little turns of phrase. Bravo.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm just laughing at myself because we were given the decoder ring before hearing Mezzanine. We talked about the decoder ring for Yard, and as you're reading it, I'm making notes and maps and lines. I'm like, surely I see the, but yet you came up with it with these prompts. And when I read them as we were preparing for it, I was like, oh, of course I understand. And in Yard they're alive, and Mezzanine they're dead. But hearing it today, the Rorsch blot of what I'm seeing in these wonderful stories is now I'm convinced that the kinesthesiologist all along is a ghost, and the house all along is a sort of Mitziazi-esque bathhouse for ghosts, but sort of croquet house for ghosts. And the two stories are simply separated by time from before. One is before the exorcists have their way, and the second is after. And I'm writing down all the clues and proof, but but that's just for now. No matter what it is, they reflect and echo each other so wonderfully. What was it like for you writing two at the same time? With did you have the intention to build in these echoes? Did the overlaps and echoes come naturally, or a bit of both?
Yeah, I guess a bit of both. I definitely did start Mezzanine when I was partway through Yard. Yard did take a long time to kind of get the last act to come to a place where I felt it not only was somehow answering the first part with the croquet players and what the kinesiologist was trying to do, but was also somehow reacting to the experience of the house and the quest for the ghosts. That had to somehow contribute to where she wound up at the end. And it took a bit of work before I kind of came up with a way to make that balance. And in the meantime, I was working on Mezzanine. I think I probably finished started Mezzanine second and finished it first. And then had, so some of the echoes, I was hearing kind of come that way from having it the other one done.
They work really well together, especially coming back to in the beginning, or the beginning of Yard. We learned that the kinestologist always wanted to float up. They always wanted to be a ghost, and yet at the end, the character at the end of Mezzanine does float up. And whether or not this is the same character, I had the feeling that it was the same character this time around because of the talk about in Mezzanine. What is left of these ghosts is these echoes and the obsessions. and yet it sort of answers all those questions I had. I'm like, who is this person that she's off on this month? Why? How can it be that she's? I was trying to apply logic. Like, why would a person be on a month-long croquet assignment when it makes sense that one, at least the way this listener was viewing it this time around was, all that's left of the kinesthesiologist is her obsession, is her vocation, and it's not necessarily what the Dakota Ring and the Magic 8 Ball says, but that was a fun way that I was looking at it today.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good sign if a story starts like generating more and more possible meanings and possible connotations and things. Definitely, it's one of the fun things about writing is that as you go along, you do a certain amount, and then your brain starts consciously or subconsciously like extrapolating and making it kind of go out from there. There's a great quote. I don't have it right handy, but there's a quote from Italo Calvino about how his ideas like develop like crystals. Go out.
I saw a Calvino
notion.
The chess player, I believe it was the chess player, or maybe it was the card player in Yard, when they say it was the other logic of saying like, he was making that if the ghost would infinitely propagate, and his chain of logic that was still clearly wrong. Yet again, I was seeing that like in the end, I thought we were seeing the ghost start to infinitely propagate. Like we were seeing the the generativeness of it. And I felt like some resonance between those two lines where I was convinced that they were wrong in Yard. And I feel like at the very end, there was an expansiveness in both these pieces, but the end of Mezzanine felt very expansive to me. Like it was like something was happening and it was generating. And even just the energy of the description of what happened. I love that the way, and this leads to my next question. I love this whole notion of like the year-long great expulsion, the exorcism, and it's this a disc of exorcised ghosts above. It's such an image of seeing that. But that's what happens when all these ghosts. And yet it's also like it has a mechanism. It has an ecology of the supernatural. That is the way that they are actually clearing the house. So this is a story full of exorcists and full of ghosts and secondary worlds. How do you approach using ghosts and using the supernatural as a fantasist?
Well, I think one of the cool things about ghosts, and I suppose this works for other kind of classic story and folklore entities, is that, there's a lot that's kind of common knowledge about ghosts and how they work. So you don't have to do a lot of explaining up front. You throw in a ghost or the idea of a ghost, and you start to get some ideas, and you can bounce off of that, and you can do small references, and people will supply a bit more to it out of other things they've seen and read and heard, and at the same time you can introduce twists on it, and I think you've got room to do some of those twists on it because it's pretty familiar to start with. That most people are kind of starting at a similar baseline, and you can improvise a bit on that and feel like it might be something that is going to be entertaining for the reader to see these changes, and that they might at least if they've got a similar temperament, they'll be into the idea of a ghost that's kind of normal but kind of different, and playing off things like definitely one idea about ghosts is that they have some kind of ritualized, repeated routine that they go through. Usually that's like maybe some strong emotional moment from their lives that they're just trapped in reenacting. So kind of play with that and play with things that aren't that a little bit here. And
Yeah.
I mean, I hadn't thought of the kinesiologist being necessarily the progenitor of the ghost, but I suppose in any way that they're this kind of zealot, it's interesting that they get stuck in this really regimented routine, but for a little while in their early ghost years, they seem to be one of the more free wandering of the ghosts compared to everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was seeing that because in the end of Yard, it's sort of like they're going off to this new place, and yet at the end of Mezzanine, the ghosts are they've taken to the tone was satisfying and resolving. Like they've taken, oh wow, she's always having to correct, always wanting not to, and finally it felt so refreshing, or such. You felt the relief, you felt that shift, that oh my God, they not only did they listen to me, they've like incorporated it and it, like that expansiveness and that Calvino like crystallization was happening. So whether or not they were the same character or not, there was definitely a resonance happening there. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna go back in time. I don't know how many years, at least a couple of decades. Our late great instructor Terry Bisson told us, I think he gave us as a homework assignment, I'm not sure if you're remembering it or not, I remember him telling us students to like take a classic figure, take a classic element like a ghost, a dragon, a vampire, and write a story about it, yet make it your own. And I felt like you were all those things that you can check if you didn't do the assignment, you can check it off now belatedly to our instructor who has moved on. But he was mentioning that in the context of probably just building our baby writer skills. But it fits into what you were saying, is like, yeah, you can have this interaction with the reader, and like everyone knows a ghost, so you don't have to world build certain things, and you can save the world building to make it something that's different and interesting, which I think you've done. You've clearly done in these two stories, at least for this reader and listener. So that was really well done. These are fantastic additions to the series. Notes from an Imaginary Place. Before I ask the last question, can you tell us again how can we connect with this series? Is there a place where we can get all of them? Or is it just are we going to connect now and get them moving forward? Or tell us how to connect with the series so far.
Yeah, if you want to sign up for it, you can find the details on my website, rudidornemann.com, and also all the previous installments. The newsletters are out there on the MailChimp site, the newsletter provider I use, and the recorded podcasts are out there on various podcast hosts. So those should still be out there and available. And if you are looking for a way to locate them, I've actually got an entry for all the previous stories in the sequence on my website as well, with a little snippet of the story, a little intro, and then links to the newsletter so you can read it, and the podcast so you can hear it.
I'm asking for our thank you for everyone for joining us. I'm asking for everyone out there, and I'm asking for myself, because what fun it will be to go back and listen to them all so far. What's the last question? What's next for you in the series? Any sneak peeks, or what's next?
Yes, I have actually. Well, I've got a number of stories that were kind of half done and kind of been stuck for a while, and get some ideas for trying to kind of revive those, keep them going. But I also have a new story I just started, kind of a tweak to the grand scheme, because I had for the letter S, the location was going to be showroom, and then I came across mention of a new thing that apparently some particularly extravagant billionaires are doing, called a snow room.
Oh my.
where it's like they hire the people who do artificial snow for ski mountains and things,
Oh, I
and they
can't wait
build
for that
cold
one.
little rooms.
A
So
snow room showroom in the hands of Rudi Dornemann.
yes,
people.
I don't know if a showroom element will still be there, but snow room was way too good to pass up.
Yes.
So that gave me a little boost into the next story. So yeah, if I'm suitably industrious and can get everything recorded and edited, my goal is to get Mezzanine officially out there in the next couple of weeks, and then Yard in the next couple of weeks, Mezzanine in maybe early September, and then Snow Room in October. And with any luck, I can get on a reasonable schedule. My goal is to wrap up the rest of the series with the 26th story, which is going to be Ziggurat. I'm actually keeping Z as the end, and hopefully do that by the end of 2027. So gives me a little wiggle room to fall behind, but I'll try.
Do you feel like some of these stories might get written at the same time and some echoes might get built in moving forward?
Echoes might get built in. Don't want to give away too much, but already planning for there to be echoes of a number of stories in Ziggurat.
Wonderful.
The other ones I haven't stumbled across any linkages yet. Early on, I did have some ideas for putting two of them in the same world, one of which has already been out as Depot, and the other of which was the story for I. But I am not sure if I'm going to change up what I wound up doing for I, because that's another one that there's a bunch that like I've started and it's like, okay, I'm connecting the dots to the different prompts, but it's like, hasn't quite got the energy to keep going. So it's like, okay, maybe I do something different with this dot, something else to fulfill that word, and try to keep the whole thing going. So
fulfill that word. The clay is still wet. The crystals are still crystallizing. Thank you so much for having this evening of Imaginary Places with us. It was absolutely wonderful.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you again to Rudi Dornemann. And enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Stay safe. Stay strange. Rudi, stay connected with me and everyone else. We'll see you next time. Thank you.